So over the last decade or so, there's been a boom in products advertised as paint plus primer or self-priming paint. Essentially a paint mixture that primes a surface for itself. It seems like a win-win, a chance to cut the tedious primer coat out of the process altogether. But do self-priming products really work, or are they just a marketing gimmick? To answer that, I teamed up with Nick O'Keefe of Oak City Coatings in Raleigh, North Carolina. Nick is a paint expert and one of my new content partners. He helped me unravel the mystery of self-priming paint. And that's what I'm talking about today on The Honest Carpenter Show. So Behr was really the first company to label a product as paint plus primer, and after that, other companies followed suit. Pretty soon, every major paint manufacturer had some version of self-priming paint. To the average consumer like me, it seemed like some major breakthrough had been made. Chemical engineers had finally found a way to combine these two products into one. But was that actually the case? The short answer is not exactly. In many cases, these new self-priming products had little to no difference from the paint products that preceded them. They were essentially the same product with a new label. But as Nick points out, the concept wasn't necessarily sinister because these self-priming products did have certain attributes that set them apart from other paint products. And those attributes gave them sort of primer-like characteristics in the right settings. See, paint contains a variety of chemicals and minerals. These components help it bind to a surface, spread easily, build up in thick, opaque layers, and resist moisture penetration or damage. So paint really does a lot, and high-quality paint does all these things better. They cover better, last longer, and generally take fewer coats to produce a good finish. Primer, on the other hand, is good at very few things. It's much thinner than paint, so it doesn't hide surfaces well. And it contains little to no pigment, so it doesn't really yield color. But what it does well is fill in porous surfaces. Primer contains a lot of resins, and these resins get into all the nooks and crannies in surface materials. It fills in those tiny voids better than paint would. It also provides a good bonding surface for paint layers to come. Paint grabs onto the primer coat better than it would the actual substrate below, and it stays bonded for longer without flaking and peeling. So there are very salient differences between paint and primer. But the funny thing is that really high quality paint will actually do some of these things on its own in the right situations. I spent probably 3 hours talking paint with Nick, and much of what he said blew my mind because I had no idea how paint compositions actually worked. We'll have to do multiple videos on the topic. But the takeaway value here is that really high quality paints contain much better components, including better minerals and resins, which can penetrate surfaces deeply and provide better hiding and finish. This means that they can perform well in a variety of circumstances where primer may not even be present. So it turns out that a lot of the products labeled as self-priming paint were actually just very high quality paint, in some cases with slightly more resins. That's it. But the problem is that even very high quality, high performing paint still isn't enough to deal with some surface conditions. When you turn these self-priming buckets around and read the instructions on the back, you'll often see exceptions to their application. For instance, many products will recommend that you still use a primer for surfaces that are previously unpainted or uncoated. That includes bare wood, metal, concrete and masonry, and even drywall. And in many instances, they'll even specify which type of primer you should use because each of these surfaces has very unique characteristics and may require different products. And if these spec exceptions aren't listed on the back of the can, they may still be listed in the technical literature that you'll find for products on company websites. These documents are actually very interesting to look through, and I'll probably talk more about them in the future. But what it comes down to is that these self-priming products generally always perform better on surfaces that have already been painted and coated. Now, that might sound like a ripoff. I mean, the goal is to cut steps out, right? Does it really count if somebody else already took those steps for you? But Nick points out that self-priming paint can still be very useful in some cases, especially when you're making drastic color changes. The general logic is that if you're going from a very dark color to a very light color in a room, you always need to prime in order to hide the first color better. But because self-priming paints really do cover and hide better, you can often just cut that priming step right out. Nick advises going straight to the self-priming coat, because if you start with an actual primer, then you're guaranteed to need that third coat. But if you start with the self-priming paint, there's a really good chance you'll be fine in two. And I'll add that companies are constantly tweaking their products and making them better. Some Behr products insist that new drywall can be coated with just their self-priming paint for great results. And they may be right. Some products really may perform at a higher level. But to be sure, check their technical papers online just to see if maybe they're omitting some exceptions on the can. The devil is often in the details, And there is an element of marketing to all this. Anyways, that's some info on self-priming paint. I want to thank Nick for helping with the video. He's a paint genius, and you're going to see more of him on the show soon. Let me know what you thought of the video down in the comments, and please consider subscribing and hitting that bell button to turn on notifications. That way you'll know the moment we post something. I'm Ethan James with the Honest Carpenter. I'll see you next time.